Hello and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. You join us on a day where there's a strange big yellow ball in the sky in the west of Scotland, which means that there's plenty of people wandering about without clothes on and doing stupid things. There's lots of activity going on outside my house with people mowing lawns, and there's a gentle sizzle that you can hear, which is not barbecues, it's the west of Scotland skin tones gently frying in the sun, which is never a good thing. There's going to be some exceptionally bad people at A&E over the next couple of days. So yes, fun and games. Anyway, today it is another special edition of the Moviescramble podcast where we are doing our collaboration podcasts covering films that ignited people's love for cinema. Now, it may not be the first film, it may be a recent film, it may be one from the dim and distant past. As we go through the Collab season, we're going to be talking about a whole range of different films. So, today we are joined, as always, by Mary, and we are also joined by Craig McDonald from the Well Good Movies podcast. Mary, how the hell are you doing? You all right?
I'm just about surviving. It's very warm in this attic. So when you said people about taking clothes off and doing stupid things, I was like, this is maybe where this pod is going. It's very warm in here.
Nice. Craig, welcome.
How are you doing? You all right? Yeah, I'm doing good. The big ball of fire you described is also here in Wales. I don't fully know how to deal with it either. Just enjoying it as it comes, considering that last week we had hailstorms. This seems nice.
Yep, excellent. So today we are talking about the 2005 movie V for Vendetta. This was Craig's choice. A very good choice, I must say.
Thank you.
Very impressed by that, yes. It was directed by James McTeague from a screenplay by the Wachowskis, who were using their male pronouns still at that point, but I'm just calling them Wachowskis because it makes things so much easier for everybody. It was based on a comic book and graphic novel from Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore, although Alan Moore has since, well, at the time, kind of disowned it and moved away from it because it was radically different to what he actually put down on the page, but I'm sure we'll get to that in a short time as well. It has a fairly decent cast, I must say. It includes Natalie Portman, Hugo Weaving, Stephen Rea, John Hurt, Eddie Marzan is in there as well. Quite a few other well-known people as well, including the likes of Stephen Fry in one of his rare screen appearances as well. So, Craig, we'll come to you first, obviously, because you chose the film. So when was the first time that you saw this film?
So for me, it's a bit of a weird story with this film. So I probably saw this film in part in 2008. So back in the day when BBC Three was just a channel that was just showing anything and everything they could late at night. This is one of the films that they seem to frequent once every couple of weeks. So when I was just channel skipping, I would come across scenes from this movie. And then eventually, I think it gets to about, say, early on in 2009, where I finally just decided to sit down and watch the film in its entirety. And yeah, I think it's safe to say that it has left a lasting impact on me. I was at a charity event where they wanted everyone to dress up to help fundraising. I chose to dress up as V. So there's a picture of me in our local paper, which is just me in like the entire sort of Guy Fawkes garb holding the mask. They even gave me a black hair bob wig. Yeah, I also then went to university and wrote and this was the subject of one of my first essays at university as well. Specifically looking at like the relationship of like media and power within the world of V for Vendetta.
Nice. Good stuff. Mary, when was the first time you saw this?
So I definitely remember seeing this in the cinema at the time. I must admit, I wasn't familiar with the graphic novel. And actually, I'm going to admit, I hadn't seen The Matrix by this point, so I didn't know who Hugo Weaving was. Sorry. The Matrix came much later in my cinema-going experiences. But I remember there was such a fuss over it at the time, because celeb culture being the way it was in the early 2000s, that, you know, Natalie Portman had shaved her head for this role, and that she appeared on the red carpet still sort of with the head shaved, but in like a beautiful, elegant gown for the premiere of this film. So I remember all that really well. And yeah, I was really taken aback by, well, first of all, like the really striking color scheme that's throughout it. And then, as you've mentioned, John, the sort of well-kent faces that, you know, are from British sort of film and television. And the speech that he gives, the sort of famous soliloquy that's full of V's at the start of the film, I actually had that printed out and pinned on the inside of my wardrobe because I used to use it for drama vocal warm-ups as well, because it's very good for getting the old mouth moving. So yeah, I have lots of fond memories of watching this, and actually watching it again, given current events in the world, it was just really refreshing and just a fantastic watch. It's a really powerful film.
Nice. My first viewing was when it came out at first in the cinema. I was a massive fan of Alan Moore. Well, before that, I had read a lot of his stuff in the likes of 2000 AD and then on to DC. And I had a copy of both Watchmen and V for Vendetta as well when they came out in graphic novels. So I was like sort of, I drank the Kool-Aid by that point. I was sort of fully invested in everything. So yeah, I was really looking forward to this film. And yeah, it was, like you say, there was quite a lot of publicity and things about it, around about it at the time, things like that. So yes, it's very good indeed. So obviously we've probably all rewatched this for this particular pod. So Craig, what stood out for you most in this viewing?
I think, as Mary says, it's just impossible to watch this film now without just looking at some of the things that are being constructed within the film and just thinking reality has gotten terrifyingly close to many of these aspects. Whether that just be the way in which media is constructed to actually get out a lot of this of these messages, whether it's just the idea of politicians and their abuse of power, just making sure that they get exactly what they want. Hopefully we're not at the stage where just governments are actively deciding to attack their own citizens with like false attacks. Some people claim that we are. Some people probably, the people who believe, say, that 9/11 was an inside job, etc., probably believe we're at that stage. I'm slightly more optimistic. I don't know whether that makes me naive or stupid. But yeah, just the fact that this film was obviously made well over 20 years ago, and the fact that this still has a lot of resonant themes about the way in which government should be called into check, and the way that people, that very prominent line of just people should not be afraid of their governments, government should be afraid of their people. And the fact that that sentiment is one that I think really stood out to me, because I think from initial viewing, obviously, you know, the V speech, the media speech, they all stood up. But the fact that just remembering that one individual line, I think that had so much more of a punch now.
Yeah, I think watching it this time around, because early doors, you get that really inflammatory BTN news broadcast, and you've got Roger Allen's just odious little character. Immediately I was struck in like, oh my god, this is the reality that we are living in, because you look at like some GB News, and anytime a reform candidate is on the television, I'm like, this is the rhetoric just now. And obviously you've got like the big, you know, strength through unity, unity through faith slogans everywhere, and the fact that John Hurt is playing the subtler character, like the allusions to Orwell in 1984 are not lost on me this time around watching it. But yeah, I mean, I a bit like Craig, I'm hopeful that we're not quite at the stage that the film suggests we're at, but at the same time, you're just like, my god, this film is 20 years old and it could not be more relevant. And I think that watching it this time around as well, you're struck by how the performances are so human and so like fallible. Like there's characters in there that you can completely identify with. Like it's not a silly notion that somebody has banned books in their house. You know, my house is covered in books, and there's something that's so precious to me, and the fact that, you know, it's something that becomes so secret and so poisonous. Like I just thought this time around, I was struck by how easily people could get swept up in something like this,
and also just having loads of people hiding their identity.
Yeah.
Do you feel differently about the film on a second watch, or do you like a more recent watch, or does it still feel as if you remembered it the first time?
It still feels like I remember it.
Yeah, cool.
I feel like there was more to it this time around. Again, it's a bit like watching Mulan. I feel like coming to it older. Obviously, this film's 20 years old, and I am 20 years older. I think you approach it with different eyes because you've lived through a lot more as well, and therefore the comparisons to whatever you might have experienced are sort of easier to make. So yeah, I felt it was still impactful. It felt powerful the first time around, but this time around you're just kind of going, this is a wee bit closer to the bone than I remembered.
Yes, quite. Now, I haven't actually mentioned the plot so far, so I'll do a wee quick overview of the plot. So this is, in terms of the film, it's the near future Britain, where they are ruled by the Norse Fire Party. It's a totalitarian state, basically a police state more than anything else. And as you mentioned, Mary, Adam Sutler, which is not a very subtle name at all, is in charge, and he runs the country with an iron fist. Evie Hammond, who's played by Natalie Portman, she works for BTN, the state broadcaster, and she has a bit of a troubled past in that her parents were taken away from her when she was younger because they were protesters and they got caught up in riots and things. Now, there's something that's never really mentioned, but the US and Russia actually had a war, a nuclear war, which actually basically ended both of their dominance, and the world is a greyer place because of that. And that's why you can get the likes of like a fascist state coming into being, because people are afraid. They want somebody to actually lead, and they're quite happy to hand over power. So within this, like has been mentioned, they ban books, they listen in, there's listening vans go about everywhere, and out of nowhere comes this masked hero with a Guy Fawkes mask on, and he is prepared to stand up and be counted. He uses the date of the 5th of November to basically announce himself to the world and says, in 1 year's time, I will destroy the Houses of Parliament, because a building is only important when people revere it. Otherwise, it's just a building. And that's where the story goes from there, the intertwining of the state, the police, and, well, as he is called, a terrorist. So that's basically a kind of a quick overview. Now, in terms of the story and the world building, how effectively do you think the film actually establishes this dystopian Britain that we are presented with?
So I think with regards to the wider context, I think it tries to go very subtly for it. So there are very brief allusions to the fact that the US has fallen. The US are trying to request supplies from the UK, which, interesting perspective, ironic considering what the relationship currently going on now, but hey ho. Yeah, so I have some vague context from like my brief interactions with the graphic novels, but I had completely forgotten that it was also Russia had collapsed at this point as well. So that is something that I felt, again, probably would have needed that context. It definitely feels like the film relies on just a lot of references to these major incidents, and then obviously we get the full sort of construction of that story with the investigation and just learning about the people involved in discovering the virus, and then we're just told, oh, this virus is then used. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
seems fairly devastating just to find out like this. So I think it definitely could have done more to sort of place the UK within the wider context of the world and how it's been created. But I think in terms of the here and the now, in terms of just what they're going through, I think it is very effective. So the interaction with the Fingermen, the fact that we have glimpses of these shows and what's being talked about on them, the fact that you do have pretty much the majority of shots of people are just shots inside their houses, like showing, even though they seem comfortable, they are confined. And just the fact that over the film, they then sort of like let out more gradually over time. And I think in terms of that building and just how much this, both the presence of the totalitarian state, but also just the falling of that state, I do think the film is quite effective.
Good stuff. Yep. Would agree with that.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I think that context is everything in this case, and as you say, as you've both identified, some of the stuff that feels quite critical to the state that we're in is sort of mentioned and moved along from. But I think in terms of the world that it shows us immediately, like I think the sense of fear and the sense of tension is evident straight away. Like the world seems dark, it seems grey, it seems like everyone's sort of holding themselves to themselves, and the lack of trust amongst people, I think is really evident straight from the start as well. Like, no one is ever having a really honest conversation with anyone else throughout the film. It's only when we get much later into the film, when we meet other characters, that we perhaps get a little bit of truth. So I think it's really interesting in the sense that it's just a fact that this fascist government exists. You know, we see their slogans, we see their logo, if you want to call it that, and we're just told that this is the world as it is. So I think that's probably one of its strengths, though, because I think that immediate sense of this isn't right, and that feeling of uneasiness that all of the characters share, if you feel that as a viewer, that can only be a good thing and add to your experience of watching the film.
Yeah, I like the way that they just drop you in it. You're there front and center, and they kind of drip feed as part of the narrative. You learn certain things, like you say, Craig. You get snippets from TV broadcasts, and you get a wee bit of an understanding of what's actually going on. One thing I did know, even though it was grey and dull, it was incredibly clean everywhere, which is something to be said for a fascist state. They obviously get the bin men out there, so that's obviously a good thing. But yes, it was good. Now, with any sort of piece of film that's going to try and appeal to like a wide audience, there's a bit of a balancing act there, because obviously there's a certain amount of political commentary here, but it is also a piece of entertainment. Do you think that it balances that quite well, Craig?
I'd say so. I think that the fact that obviously one of the main criticisms of this film tends to get, especially in comparison to the original graphic novel, is just how much it's dialed down some of the tones. The fact it feels a lot more black and white between the idea of, is V meant to be this sort of anti-hero? Is he actually meant to be antagonist? Where here is like, no, I think you can reasonably construe that he pretty much is just a heroic character. He is doing horrific things to bad people. The only thing that's sort of questionable about that is just using human shields, basically. That's about the only sort of questionable action that we get from V in the entire film. Everything else is pretty much just a heroic stance of just general freedom fighting. So, but I do think that in terms of reaching the wider audience and just with those political messages, the fact it's very dialed down to the idea of just, you shouldn't be willing to give away these freedoms. You shouldn't be willing to allow governments to actively have this significant amount of power over you, and that you should feel free to speak up. I think it works quite well. And then when it's just a case of just watching V, you know, flipping the knives and just doing all of the fancy work, it is quite enjoyable. But I also think that it varies the kind of entertainment it goes for as well. So we also just get sort of the emotional drama when we have like the story of like Valerie told when Evie's in the detention center. Yeah, that's a thing. So it does try to vary the way in which it tells the storytelling, as well as like where it gets a lot of the entertainment from. Because realistically, there's only like 2 major fight scenes, 3 really fight scenes in this film, which is odd for sort of a comic inspired film, but I think it works. I think it's engaging.
Yeah, I think it balances the sort of spectacle of it all, like, because you know, you have that beautiful kind of panoramic shot of the London skyline, and then V conducts the city and the Old Bailey blows up, and I think that's like a really cool way of doing, like, showing sort of who he is as a character. I think in films like this, the political messages probably have to be as simple and as clear as possible, because cinema is a communicator. It's a way of sort of getting messages across, and there's no point in burying that in something that feels too heavy-handed. You know, you want people to understand, as Craig said, that you shouldn't give in to your governments, that you should be able to speak up, and you want that messaging to be super clear. But in addition to, you know, the big scale, as I say, the blowing up of London landmarks, you do have these really personal moments. And I in particular love the scene where Evie goes to Dietrich's apartment and he sort of shares his treasures with her. That makes me feel so emotional all the time, because it's just his whole life, it's his whole personality, it's who he is, and it's sort of buried away in this room as if it's something dirty and something to be ashamed of. And that personal drama really gets to me every time, because I just think how awful it must be to live a life where it's a lie. Who you say you are is not who you are, sort of emotionally, spiritually, you know, whatever. And that scene in particular always gets to me, because I can't imagine what it must feel like to have to hide away your treasures like that. So I think it balances the spectacle with the personal drama really, really well. And as I say, this is not a film that you would want to be subtle in any way. It doesn't deserve that. It needs to be blunt force trauma the entire way.
Yeah, true. Now, we've kind of talked around the main sort of characters here. So the main character here is V himself, character who is, you never see his face at all. He's always wearing the mask, whether in private or in public. So what makes that character compelling? Obviously, because the character is carrying this film to a certain extent alongside Evie, but I would say more V. So what is it about V that actually stands out? Is it the mystery of it, the mask, the performance? What do you think?
For me, it's a couple of things. So one, I think Hugo Weaving's vocal performance does a lot of heavy lifting. I'm really sorry, I can't remember the name of the original actor who it was currently doing it. So there was, because Hugo Weaving came in later, right?
And it was James Purfoy. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So he does all of the physical performances as well as he was doing the voice until he then gets dubbed by Weaving. But I think the combination between them as well just does work quite well to give the character a lot of presence. The fact that these movements are quite unique. The fact that he's very lyrical is the way I would describe him as a character. The fact that he's basically just a walking monologue. And I think that for a lot of other characters, it would get tiresome. But the entire point of V, as he even says himself, is that he is purely meant to be sort of a perspective, something that people is just meant to think about. And then when you have right at the end, everyone dressed as V, just taking off the masks, and it's just all of the people who've been involved in the plot. I think the fact that he is just embodying this idea of just, my persona is not important. It is the ideals that all of you then absorb. And I think that's what makes him quite compelling. The fact he then goes into the kind of like, I love you stuff is a bit jarring. That's like the only knock against the character, but just the way he generally conducts himself and just like speaking. Also, just I am obsessed with the way he says yes. It's just every time he has to say it, it's just yes.
That is very seductive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know that about James Purefoy. This is brand new information. That's quite the switch up. For me, like V, the silhouette obviously is very striking, but as Craig has put it, he's an idea. He's not, it doesn't matter who is behind the mask, essentially. It's the notion that like an idea can change the world, or one person can change the world. Obviously, Hugo Weaving's vocal performance is extremely crisp, it's extremely articulate, and it's very intense, as you said. Even just the way he says yes, it's like studying something. So I didn't realize that about James Purefoy, though, and that has genuinely rocked my world, quite frankly.
The other thing with Weaving as well is the amount of voices he has to do in this film, because V is canonically just doing all of these random different personas. So he's having to like vary it up. This felt like this is like Hugo Weaving's training for Cloud Atlas.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. I mean, a lot of his vocal performance was actually redone as ADR because they had real problems actually miking him up. They tried a microphone inside the mask, and then one of these wee sort of, the performance mics that people use, and it didn't work very well at all. It was just too muffled, so they had to really do it in ADR. So he basically had to give a performance again, which I thought was really kind of like exceptional, because the character of V is very sort of still character. He doesn't move about an awful lot when he doesn't have to. He's quite economical. It's more of his presence more than anything else. So every time that he's in an action scene, he never really sort of like dives into the action scene. You may see him like on a rooftop or whatever, but he doesn't really act or react until he's actually about to do something. So I kind of like that, the whole sort of stillness aspect of the character, and it kept a certain amount of mystery there as well. And I did like the fact that even when, like I said, when he was alone, he was always with the mask on, and you only saw his hands once, and even that was a bit of a mistake because they thought that Evie was still sleeping. And there must have been a temptation at some point for them to say, well, maybe you do take the mask off, because if you think about it, there's a certain lack of ego involved with an actor that doesn't want his face on screen. And it's very unusual for an actor to actually want to do that. Thinking back to the likes of the Judge Dredd film, where Sylvester Stallone insisted on taking off the helmet, whereas Karl Urban was quite happy to just keep it on because that's what the character does. But yes, it must have been a temptation there to, have this sort of disfigured, fire-burned face actually on show. But I'm really glad that they avoided it. I really am. I thought it was so much better. So on the opposite side of that, you have Evie and her, well, let's call it a transformation more than anything else. She starts off as just a normal young lady with, well, I'm not so sure about her accent, to be perfectly honest, despite the acting coach that was working with her extensively. She has the biggest sort of journey within this film. So what did you think of this sort of the way that happened? Did you think it was like completely necessary the way it happened and all the things that kind of happened to her? Or could you have shorthanded that in a certain way?
It's interesting because it definitely feels like, with the context of her parents and her brother, etc., it definitely feels something that is latched on for the basis of just that motivation. But in terms of just seeing how it affects like a lot of the life before trying to escape I would say there doesn't seem to be any sort of demonstration of scars for that, I would say. So it felt that, especially with this idea of just because the entire motivation, I know she said she doesn't want to be afraid anymore, but apart from the moments where we would, understandably expect to see her scared, where she's literally being attacked by the Fingermen. Awful name for an organization, by the way, when they're going to be doing that. Yeah. Although I do think it's cool that, granted, the film never spells this out, but I do think it's cool that the entire government organization are referred to as different body parts. So you have like the hand, which has like the finger there. You have the eyes, you have the ears, you have the mouth of the government as well. That's really effective. The film should have drawn on that and made that parallel clearer, but hey ho, that's what the graphic novel's there for. So yeah, I just felt that I would have liked to have seen her sort of deal with that history more before the eventual response to this is just taking her into a situation where she doesn't realize that what she's going through is training for dealing with that kind of trauma. Because obviously the biggest impact to her in this film is V capturing her and basically torturing and basically training her to be willing to sacrifice her life against the state, which is effective scenes, but I would have liked to have seen the foregrounding for that a little bit more in terms of just that's what she's kind of realizing and that's what she's kind of, or just it's necessary for her to do. It definitely felt like they wanted to go for the gut punch and they wanted that to sort of feel like V's big kind of anti-hero moment, the idea of just, oh, I've done this really horrific thing, but kind of for a good cause. It felt like a bit of a clash, and it also just seems that despite how angry she was, she seemed to kind of accept that that's what he was going for, like fairly quickly. Just one bout in the rain, and she's like, "Oh, it's fine. I didn't like my hair anyway. You're letting me go now." It's just like, is this Stockholm syndrome? This feels like Stockholm syndrome, guys.
Yeah, I feel her response to that is so weak. Like, and they obviously try to do this sort of parallel of like Evie is reborn in rain as V was reborn in fire, but even that feels a bit cliched by this point. Like, I remember seeing it for the first time in the cinema and being shocked, obviously, at what the detention center actually was, like what that situation was, because obviously going into it blind and having never read the graphic novel, you certainly think it's the film's leading you down one particular route. But I didn't really kind of understand her character this time around. I felt like she obviously works for BTN, so she's sort of like in the belly of the beast, as it were, and she doesn't seem to display any of the sort of curiosity or sort of fighting stance that her parents seem to have, or maybe that's just something she's choosing not to do because of the fate of her parents, but you never really get enough depth as to who she is as a character. And then, as Craig says, she's put through this absolutely horrific experience. Like, it looks like a former Soviet gulag that she's put into, and she's waterboarded and, her head shaved, and the rats are crawling around her. And then she kind of gets like upset and teary with V for about 5 minutes, and then it's like, well, crack on then, you know, I love you, kisses, and I'll send you off in the subway. It doesn't actually make sense in terms of character development. And I don't know, I mean, you guys can correct me obviously because you've read it. I don't know how much they haven't put in from the graphic novel that would sort of flesh that out a little bit, but I actually felt a little bit disappointed this time around looking at her character. It wasn't quite the sort of iconic role that I remembered it to be.
It's also weird because it feels like they want to build her as a parallel to V, but just get to a point when they just decide to discard that kind of parallel. So like you have the scenes where obviously at the beginning of the film, he's gearing up, she's gearing up to basically go out, and then like the rebirth scene as well. But then nothing else comes from it apart from V recognizing that she makes the decision about whether or not the Houses of Parliament gets blown up, which at this point doesn't really feel like a choice. If I'm honest.
Yeah, it's happening. Yeah.
And then her just saying some of the things that V said. It's just, again, this would work a lot more as a parallel if you actually make it very clear that there is a parallel. I just don't think they fully do that with a character.
Yeah, I just don't think they had enough time to do that with the character. I think the film ran for about 2 hours and 10 minutes, and that's kind of pushing the envelope for these type of films, I think. Well, not now, but back then, yeah, they were trying to sort of keep things to run about the sort of 2 hour mark if possible. So I feel as if some stuff was cut judiciously out of that just because it made sense just to keep it going. Now, I liked the fact that she went through trauma twice. Once you didn't really see because the policeman talked about how she had her mother and father had been taken away, and she went into the sort of the care system, and their reaction to that was, oh my God, because obviously it must have been horrendous. So she's almost been through that whole sort of programming at the time. And that's why I think when she's working at BTN, she is quite timid. She's not curious because curiosity is not something that actually will do you any good. You're more trying to just kind of fit in and be, you know, a citizen, a normal citizen, and not draw attention to yourself because at any time the black bag can come over your head, basically. So that's kind of what I thought when she was at the start of it. It didn't make much sense though at the very start when she was getting dressed to go out because she obviously knew the dangers. So why was she going down like side alleys and things like that and getting caught by the finger men? Again, I can't say that with any having a smile on my face as well. Yeah. I
mean, the logic there is just, oh, I've run out of time, and her response isn't, I will ring the guy and be like, hey, sorry, I was getting ready. But it's now curfew and I kind of don't want to be attacked. The response is, oh, I better get a move on then. It's just like, no, like, no.
Yeah, quite. So the third sort of main character in this is the Chief Inspector, Finch, who is actually carrying out an investigation. Now, the film gives an awful lot of time to this story strand. I would say probably is equal with the sort of the EV and the V side. So there's a lot going on there. And that sort of strand is used a lot for exposition as well because they're finding out an awful lot of things as they're going along with the investigation. What did you think about that character of Finch, who is not a true Englishman according to people around him either, which I kind of thought was quite nice because he had a bit of Irish heritage there.
Finch, yeah, the line about not being a true Englishman gets to me in particular because obviously I come from Irish heritage as well, so I was just like boo to this straight away. But I feel like with Finch, you never get the sense that his heart is in the job, like in comparison to his sort of counterparts that he works alongside. He is in pursuit because that's his job, but you never get the sense that he is like a career climber or someone who's desperate to sort of climb on the next, you know, person because that will get him brownie points with the top brass or it will allow him to sort of progress in his career. He actually seems really weary when we first meet him, and that weariness obviously compounds itself throughout the course of the film. So I think he's a really interesting character in the sense that you never get the sense that he's fully bought in to what he's doing. So you wonder how he's ended up in that position. So that is obviously really interesting in terms of like where that character's backstory sort of comes from. And yeah, he's not even going to be accepted by his peers because he isn't seen as like pure, if you want to call it that. So yeah, it just furthers the sort of fascist themes that go on throughout it. But yeah, I think he's a really interesting character. And fun fact, pretty sure it was Stephen Rea who was married to an IRA alleged terrorist as well. So he's been mixed up in politics like his whole life, personal life as well.
Oh,
Oh,
damn.
well.
Alleged, just in case.
Yeah. I'm cutting all those alleged out. You're on your own
very
here.
good, John. Yeah.
Yeah, so moving on from Mary's blatant libelous comments there.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. The perception of him that I got was that I think obviously he's a very enlightened character. I think that probably the sense we get from him is that the reason that he's gotten so far up is because he just seems to have this innate of foresight that probably has gotten them out of some situations. The fact that in the first scene we see him sort of recognizing how good V's abilities with the making of the bombs was and willing to acknowledge that. The fact that he's constantly having hunches about how things could happen, and even though in the most extreme situations you have everyone else around him challenging that. So it's like, oh, what makes you think it's going to be a train despite the fact we sealed off the tunnels? It's a hunch. But obviously leading up to, and those intuitions beautifully leading up to probably my favorite scene of the film, and I think most people's favorite scene of the film. But it probably just is that, unfortunately, in the same way that many regimes, you have lots of people whose heart isn't in it, but they're just very good at doing the thing because it's the thing that's just going to keep them alive. It just feels like he seems to be the best at doing this as an inspector, and that's just the thing that's keeping him alive at this point. So it's not a case of ever being embraced. It's just he's being useful.
Yeah, exactly. It says at one point that he's how people can question him because he's been a party member for 27 years, and the response back to that as well, you're just here because you do a good job. Basically, you're good at what you do. We can't replace you. We've got nobody else that can really do what you do. And yeah, a lot of it is down to hunches and stuff as well. He's one of the few characters in this that you actually feel a bit sympathetic towards, as far as I'm concerned. There's very few of them. Obviously, outside of the main characters, you're meant to feel a certain amount of sympathy for Evie as well, and sort of root for her, but it's very unusual for you to root for one of the antagonists unless, well, it kind of says more about you than it does about the characters themselves in that sort of situations. Yeah. So, going on to sort of the themes and stuff like that, what do you think the film is really saying about fear and control?
Very bluntly, it's just saying that you should just overcome it. So it very much portrays this idea of just the main mechanism the state has is just utilizing all of these mechanisms of building fear, whether that just be the outright control, the indirect control, or just even just building up the levels of propaganda. The film is very much then getting to the point that just so long as you're able to just see past the veneer and know that just as a collective of people you can get past it, no government is ever going to be able to be able to beat you as a collective. So like we see this obviously with the speeches, we see this with the building sequence of just, again, when that one girl is shot by the fingerman, and even though he's holding a gun to everyone, they still smash his head in with a shovel. Go team. And just again, just seeing this with like the entire military force at the end, literally seeing the marching like army of V costumed people coming towards them, and even they were in a situation where they just realized they didn't know what to do. They didn't know if they should be firing or whatever. So they just let them pass. And then you just see all of these people just swarming past them in just a very, very odd kind of scene, because you never see that in reality. You never see any military force just letting the people get that close, let alone just physically pass them in that way. So it is just very much saying that, just again, going back to that one line, governments should be afraid of their people. And I think the way it does it is, I'd say typical, but I don't say typical in a bad sense. I think it uses all of the conventions you'd expect them to use to tell this story, but they just work. Like it just works from a narrative perspective, from the overarching story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, as we pointed out, there's various parts of the government that are named after parts of the body. And I think straight away it just goes to show how fascism restricts bodily autonomy within yourself, because you're not your own person. You're simply, a worker bee for the government. And I think that this film almost positions fear almost as a sort of like a physical illness to overcome. Like you just have to push through it. Like you just have to keep going. And there, as long as you hold on to your principles and your ideas and truly who you are and your sense of self, then fear can be overcome. But obviously, as we've seen with like the Dietrich character, being yourself can also be incredibly dangerous as well. And it's also interesting how many characters are willing to shed their skin, as it were, in order to, you know, progress their career or progress their celebrity or whatever within this particular regime. So I think it's a film that definitely encourages you to see governments as entirely fallible and not necessarily purveyors of truth. And I think that's a message that we should all stick to, given that we're all coming up for election time.
Yeah, quite. I liked the way that sort of fear sort of permeates through the film, and it sort of culminated in the scene that you mentioned, Craig, outside the Houses of Parliament when the soldiers choose not to fire. And what I took from that was the fact that they couldn't get in contact with their superiors, so they weren't able to basically act on their own, and they were too scared to act on their own, because if you do something off your own initiative and it doesn't work out well, if it works out with the death of thousands of people, then nobody else is to blame apart from the person who gave the order. So there's a whole thing, well, I'd rather not do anything at all than do something. Whereas that's obviously a different type of message that they're trying to get across, and you have to do something than rather than sit there in fear, because that's why they're in the situation they're in at present anyway, because the country was in a state of fear over what was actually happening. They were looking for a strong leader, and they got a strong leader, but not the strong leader that they actually needed, rather than, you know, perhaps a strong leader they deserved. But we don't know that, yes. So what do you think about the idea of revolution? Is it inspirational, cautionary?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think, again, just going to the sort of blanket nature of the film's message, it is very much just revolution when revolution is called for. I don't think it's ever going to be just a case of, yeah, just get rid of all governments, even though that is obviously like Alan Moore's actual feelings about government is just like, fuck them all.
Yeah.
I think it is very much just calling for the idea of just, you shouldn't have to deal with these kinds of actions. Just do what you need to do in order to collectivize and just rise up. I don't think it does anything to show like cautionary tales. Like, I don't think it's something like 1984 where you see a lot of the construction of the government and like all of that processing. This is very much sort of the deconstruction of that. So just over time, just seeing how all of these elements just sort of crumble under sort of different pressure, and even just utilizing this idea of just, look, the state is also just willing to function when you have so many players vying for power that eventually start vying for power against each other. Like, that's literally how the entire film's major plot just concludes. The idea that V just tricks the entire state into turning on each other, and eventually that gets him Sutler, to the point he doesn't even need to kill Sutler in the end. He's like the only one of like the main responsible people that he doesn't kill. He's like, I'm gonna let this guy do it.
Yeah. I think the film, first of all, I'm just going to say that I am tired of strong men leading governments just in general. But I do think the film tends to wrap it up in a bow a little bit, because as we've seen throughout history, whenever revolution has been attempted through people power, they usually end up in bloody messes, or people being, you know, disappeared or thrown out of helicopters or fed to dogs, or, you know, used as machine gun fodder and all the rest of it. So I think this is a slightly more sanitized version of revolution, but I do believe that the principle of, you know, this notion that an idea can change the world or a person can change the world is something that people should look to more, because I'm sure we're all familiar with everybody moaning about the state of the world and the way government works and people not doing enough and all the rest of it. But actually, if we took the approach that we were going to hold their feet to the fire, then maybe things might be a little different. And I think that's something that we're all very guilty of, is doing the complaining side of it, but not actually being motivated to do something about it. So I think there is genuine lessons to be learned here, and you don't have to hide behind a mask to do it. But yeah, you can hold your government accountable. That's perfectly within your right.
Mary, in your opinion, do you think V is a hero or a villain or something in between?
Oh, I don't think he could ever be considered a villain. As Craig said, there are some human shields used at some points, but you kind of excuse that because what he's doing is he is a hero because he sees through the government for what it is. And that's not to say that nobody else in the film does. Of course, there are people who are not buying the bullshit that they see on the news, or, you know, or having secret eye rolls to their partner or whatever while their kids aren't looking. But he's just the person who's willing to sort of put his head above the parapet and go, this is how I think we should be doing things. And actually, even just the notion about buildings just being buildings, I think is really important as well, because I think there's a lot of pomp and ceremony around governments and structures and all of that sort of thing. And he's showing people, look, it's just bricks. It's just bricks and mortar. It's not this big sort of ideal, like we're holding people, or sorry, putting people on pedestals, or we're living in fear when actually we don't have to. So I think I've seen him described as an anti-hero, and I think that's a fair assessment as well. I just definitely wouldn't ever call him a villain, even though that would be lovely alliteration for everything else that he does throughout the film.
Quite.
It just feels like he doesn't cross enough lines for you to really consider him an anti-hero. Like, we have two moments in the film. One is the attack on BTN station, where he obviously does, you know, attack people and put people in harm's way that shouldn't necessarily. The problem is, it's all comparative, considering that he's doing it to fight against and get out a message against a state who would happily do that to their own people anyway. So it doesn't feel like that action is disproportionate in comparison to what the state he's fighting is doing. The other one then is the imprisonment of Evie. But the only argument to that, and even then, it's cruel, don't get me wrong. But again, comparatively, he did... trying to think of the right way of saying this, but he did effectively save Evie from, again, being captured from a state who would have done that to her anyway and just killed her, and just no purpose from it whatsoever. So again, it is a very cruel thing to do, and he shouldn't have done it. But the alternative of, if he didn't intervene whatsoever, would have been worse. So it just never felt like the film showed me any of the moments where he goes across the line. Yeah, he kills a couple of people. What? He kills like a wannabe Fox News presenter. He kills a molesting priest, and I think that's a dream that many people would have. And he very, very kindly kills a botanist. Like, again,
her death is super gentle. Like, that's like and to be fair, the Louis Prothero death is really satisfying to me, because not only is that knob watching himself on TV in the shower, just everything about that character just deserves like the messiest, nastiest death ever. And I always feel satisfied when that happens.
He basically is just playing the same character as he plays in the thick of it. He's just literally, this is literally, he's left politics and has just become a news presenter, because he does all of the same inflictions as him anyway. It's just Roger Allam is like, here is my right-wing character. I'm just going to play him every time I have to play a right-wing character.
Oh, the thick of it's so good. And that does also make me want to go and watch that as well now.
Obviously, the film is now 21 years old. Do you think it holds up visually, given the advances that we've had over the last 2 decades?
Yeah, the fact that it doesn't really rely on all that much computer technology, I think, helps it maintain like that standard. I think there's like a handful of moments where, say, you can definitely tell that like 1 or 2 of the explosions are green, like CGI explosions, but even then I think there's like a lot of them that sort of are blended in quite well. I think that the slow-mo knives throwing effects is basically just like, you know, the Wachowski influence from like the Matrix, etc. I think that still holds up quite well. I think generally, cinematography wise as well, I think the film is, I don't want to borderline say gorgeous, because it feels weird considering the atmosphere it goes for, but I do think that a lot of the cinematography is quite effective, and also drawing on earlier, as well as the streets being clean of rubbish, the film just feels quite clean as well, which does make it quite pleasurable to watch. I'm glad it doesn't fall into sort of the typical dystopian, we're going to make everything seem gritty and dark. I think the fact that it does have like that unique element, despite the fact that you have a character that's very much all in black. I think that's probably why they had to do it, so that V actually does stand out. You have this sort of government that's like claiming to clean everything, considering as well that like the strength through unity through faith was originally purity, strength through purity, purity through faith, which makes a lot more sense, frankly.
Yes.
Like, you cannot be a nation that divides everyone from like the Muslims, the foreigners, and the homosexuals, and then say that you are a unified state.
You've just described a reform government. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't expect them to watch this film and just be like, write this down. This is good stuff. But yeah, I think as a film, I think it stands up. I've seen lots of films sort of shot in the like these days that don't look anywhere near as good as this film does.
Yeah, definitely.
I would agree. I think the color palette actually at times looks quite cozy. I know that's a strange thing to say, but there are certain moments in V's abode and certainly in Dietrich's house where actually things look quite warm and quite welcoming. And I think that obviously they've gone for such a stark color palette that it does look really good. The visuals hold up, and as Craig said, there's not an over reliance on like CGI or effects or whatever. So whilst you might kind of go, that's obviously been added in post, you're totally forgiving it because everything else just kind of works. I think if it had gone down the route of maybe like more heavy-handed, fight sequences or more explosions, it probably could have dated itself. But because it actually keeps those scenes to a minimum and we're focused on the people drama, then it stands up. And as we've said, all of the themes, etc., still stand up today, unfortunately.
Yep. The fight sequences themselves are quite reminiscent of The Matrix as well. You've got a lot of movement, and it's almost balletic at certain points. Obviously, it's been very well choreographed, I would say. With regards to the actual effects themselves, I think you're right. They're using minimal effects. I think it was more backgrounds that they were using it for, because I watched a behind-the-scenes documentary about the making of it, and they were talking about using practical effects as much as possible. So they made the tower, and they did part of the Houses of Parliament as well, and they made it, I think it was 1/10 scale, because the sort of lead developer was saying, you look at your budget and you make things as big as possible from the budget that you have, while still making it like really realistic. So these things were massive, and you saw them when they were actually putting all of the fireworks and everything all around it and stuff like that. And it was really good the way they did it. And obviously they did it and then augmented it with a certain amount of like CG and stuff. But you can tell that a lot of it was practical in the way that it seemed to. What they said was the bigger it is, the more realistic it looks when it blows up as well. Because you can get things that look really daft when it's just a wee tiny thing, and it just splinters completely because they've used too much explosive powder or whatever. So yeah, they'd obviously taken a bit of time and had a real sort of thought process around how they wanted to make it look and how it was going to look in years to come. And like you say, Craig, it looks a hell of a lot better than some films that we actually see now, especially in terms of the sort of production values. So yes, it's actually pretty amazing. Now, backing up everything is the score and the sound design here. Now, there's quite a lot to the sound design more than the score, but what did you think about that, Mary?
So in terms of score, I'm a big lover of classical music explosions in films, and this obviously gives you that by the bucket load. So I'm a big fan of that. But I think that the sound design in particular, like we get a lot of like swooshing of capes and of knives, and we get a real sense of like foreboding throughout the way just people move and carry themselves as well. And a lot of that comes from the sound design as well. I love clattery footsteps along corridors, etc. And I think that when we're in the detention centre in particular, we're aware of how cavernous that feels as well because of the way that the sound is set up. So I think it's a film that uses the bigger moments to great effect, because obviously that's the kind of spectacle part of it. But I think it's in the quieter moments as well that we actually see that either silence completely, or as you say, the sort of sound design where it's like V in particular sort of floats on and off screen like a phantom, and you probably hear him before you're aware that he's present in a room as well, which I think is a big part of that character design. So yeah, I think it adds to the overall experience of feeling that you're in something that's not quite reality, which I think is really important for this film.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. Craig?
Completely agree with all of that. I also just think that the film has a good balance of knowing when it should rely on sort of the orchestral music and when it should just rely on other types of music to build it up. The fact that in V's, I've forgotten, what does he call it? It's like the shadow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Shadow Gallery.
Yeah, the Shadow Gallery.
Yeah.
Beautiful name. But just the fact that in there it's constantly playing the sort of the band songs as well, just still gives it like. I think that's one of the reasons why, Mary, you said about like there was a cozy feeling. I think the fact that you have an environment called the Shadow Gallery, and it's literally playing like jazz renditions of Cry Me a River, and just every now and then you're watching the Count of Monte Cristo. Yeah, it's just good balancing. There's only one scene that I think, like, I know it's the point, but I think they go a bit too self-indulgent of like matching the sound effects, which is like the parody scene of the late night show where they, you know,
yes,
and you have like the Benny Hill theme playing, and like you have all the shoulders fart. You don't have all the soldiers farting. You have all the soldiers falling to fart sound effects.
Yeah,
but it might as well just be all the soldiers farting. That's the only point. I was just like, this is just a bit too chaotic. I know what you're going for, but like, you're trying to portray yourself as like this comedic visionary, and you're playing the Benny Hill theme and just like pressing the button of a sound effect, just being like, fart noise. Frankly, if I were in charge of the country too, even if I wasn't the dictator, I'd have him killed as well.
Yeah, I didn't find that bit particularly funny and amusing, that whole sequence. I thought it kind of takes you out a wee bit from the film because of the Benny Hill music and the fact that it's really rubbish as well. And if you get everybody that's on screen, they're all rolling about and laughing and what a carry on, you know. Did you like the fact that it was John Hurt that was actually playing the fake John Hurt as well? Yeah, in that scene. I thought that was quite nice. Yeah,
that adds a lot to it. But I guess that just goes to this idea of just how much of people really being allowed to enjoy anything. The fact that they've been given the most rubbish humor and they're all there rolling about. The only thing I say to that scene, apart from just the sound effects, is just he's like, oh, what are they going to do? Fine us and we have to give an apology. Dude, you're in a state that people have disappeared for less. You are clean, and you keep saying, oh, if they ever invade my house, this is you're the least of my concerns. You don't give them a reason to invade your house. Obviously, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, his response to that was very strange as well. It's like, are you aware of the black bagging situation that's been going on for your entire life? It kind of sounds like you might be next. But I think maybe in the sense it's like he's obviously, the fear has left his body as well. But that sequence I always find really brash in tone in comparison to the rest of the film. Like it does, as you said, John, it kind of takes you out of it a little because it is this kind of like 5 minutes of out and out chaos. And whilst there is moments of chaos in the film, it's not obviously done in this sort of like 70s sex pest cartoonish type of way that this TV show obviously is.
And the really corny laugh track in the background.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah, that's very sort of 1970s British TV stuff, isn't it? It's interesting that obviously the character of Dietrich here is quite a sympathetic character, but in the original graphic novel, he's entirely different. He's a more horrible character in that, but he was changed for the film. I think Stephen Fry had something to do with that because it's all about representation. And, you know, obviously he's an advocate of like lesbian gay culture, and like he's involved in a lot of causes. So it was all part of that as well that he wanted to be involved in. But obviously the differences between the film and the graphic novel are quite pronounced at times. Now, obviously, Mary, you won't know this because you haven't watched it, which is fine. But I am assuming with some certainty, Craig, that you have read the novel more than once. So what do you think about the differences between it?
Not for a while. So basically, I read it when I was still in university, and I left university at this point 13 years ago. So I definitely know of some of the changes, but I wouldn't be able to pinpoint to you directly individual scenes. So
no, I wasn't looking for that. No,
but yeah, I mean, yeah, they water down a lot in this film. Just on like all fronts, they do just want you to be like, oh, it's not that bad, and it's like, no, it's bad. It can be bad, guys. Like, all right, I understand he's fighting for freedom, but just don't do this.
Yeah, they have taken a certain number of shortcuts here to make it a palatable two-hour film rather than anything else. What I would say is it's kind of ripe for a reimagining as a 8-part, 10-part TV show, because there's 10 comics.
Yeah.
So you could have a comic per episode. Same idea as like Watchmen was obviously reimagined as well, but they took it further than the actual story itself. But yeah, I think it was more for the time constraints more than anything else. It was certain things. Just make it sort of lowest common denominator. Try and just get through more than anything else. So it does kind of change the story as far as I'm concerned. But I don't know whether it weakens it enough to actually be kind of upset or anything by it. I think it's fine that way. So
yeah. I just think it's a case of this film is probably not going to satiate the absolute purists of the graphic novel, but I think for a lot of people who, especially considering the culture of just how oversaturated with comic book movies we have now and a lot of the simplicity of that, I think will at least respect the idea of this kind of environment and world that has some form of philosophical depth, even if it is just mostly presented as one character just outright saying a lot of these things and then occasionally weaving some daggers. But I do understand some people who wish it just went a bit further, and I do understand like why Alan Moore kind of hates this film. The fact that he's like, there's two words that seem to be missing from this movie script, which are the words fascism and anarchy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, anarchy appears once in this film and it's said by like a random like shop robber, and fascism does not appear once.
Which is so strange now that you've pointed that out, because like everything down to the color scheme and, as I say, the little kind of logo of this government is so obviously like fascist coded. It's unbelievably like, you know, close to the 1930s Germany. I just don't understand how that word is never used. I think it's one of these words though that it is a sort of like, especially in America, like see if you call someone like a socialist, that is like the dirtiest of dirty words. And I feel like fascism probably has the same tag attached to it, and yet it's something that should be bandied around more often, quite frankly, at governments, fictional or otherwise. Oh yeah,
totally. One of the things that came from this film is the Guy Fawkes mask. It was appropriated by several organizations over the years. Now, what do you think has made it that way? Why has it become so powerful a mask, an image?
From my perspective, I think it is, obviously they try and make it like as synonymous with just Guy Fawkes' design as much as possible. But for me, I think the reason that the actual sort of facial expression of the mask works is that I think it's because of, I don't want to say it's smug, but that feels like the best word I can use to describe it. The fact that, you know, it has that kind of cheeky grin. The fact that it does feel like that sort of attitude makes people feel powerful in the mask. I think it's just the idea that you put it on and just whatever you're doing, because you're doing it. Obviously, the big one that have used this mask is anonymous. So the fact that you're doing things anonymously and you can feel powerful about it does give people that kind of like smirk, meaning they sort of embody it. So I think it does just represent that kind of rebellious nature quite well for a lot of people. I think that's the main association they get from that mask.
Yeah, totally. Yes, smirk is the word that I would have used to describe it. If you actually saw a person like that, with that sort of look on their face all the time, you would eventually slap them, I think. I don't think it would take too long before you're going, stop doing that.
And his beard as well.
Yeah. What about yourself, Mary? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think the smirk word is exactly that. And I think obviously it has become a symbol of not just Guy Fawkes, which obviously, you know, he is the ultimate government wrecker, or at least an attempt on that. But I think it's this notion that it's an idea and it's holding a government to account. And I think that's the big thing, is about, you know, being strong within your own convictions. And whilst people are obviously behind masks, it's about not being afraid to do the work that needs to be done, as it were.
Yep, totally. I would agree with that. Now, do you think that people now wear the mask, but they don't actually take into consideration the film at all? Has the mask overtaken the film?
Ooh, I think for some people it's the Halloween costume.
Yeah,
and no more than that. But I think some people definitely attach a lot more like depth and meaning to it. But I think for some people it's like, oh, this is a cool look for October 31st and nothing more.
yeah.
I would say, though, I do feel that, especially when you get to sort of YouTube short and TikTok culture, I think the fact that people are still quite aware of V for Vendetta, because the scene that I've seen populated a lot, and even it was coming up on my sort of reels before I even rewatched the movie for this podcast, was the domino falling scene. So the construction of here is everything that's going to happen. And you have so many people just watching that scene on all of these platforms, just saying, this feels like real life. So I think it is getting to that stage where, all right, fine. So I think it's kind of like a bell curve. It feels like there was a period where people were just sort of, oh, it's the anonymous mask, hey ho, whatever. But I do think it is coming back around now because of the amount of political turmoil there is globally at the moment, that people are just recognizing, okay, no, this is what this mask is representing, and going back to the film. And even if it's just that one scene, and like I said, I do think that the domino falling scene is the most powerful, effective scene in the film, if only because it's a good snapshot of what the entire movie is like, both what has happened, what is about to happen, but just the actual construction of just, this is what the government will have to do, this is what's going to happen, and then it's going to be just all out fighting, but just done in the most beautiful way of just setting up the dominoes and just watching it all fall, and then just that one domino at the end standing, just standing, perfect, genuinely perfect. And I think that because of that, I think that people do still recognize this film, even if it's just a case of coming back to it. I wouldn't be surprised if there's more of a resurgence in this, especially considering that like a lot of sort of adult sort of graphic novel content at the moment is just going for like the more sort of gory, violent. I think eventually we're going to get to the point where more people just want more of the sort of philosophical stuff. I think that's probably going to help it come out a bit more. So basically, I'm just saying we're likely to get that multi-part series once The Boys finishes in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, probably.
I was just thinking that. Although Simi, who obviously has helped hosting this pod at various points, says that the latest season of The Boys is like it's just real life, even though it was shot obviously like the best several months ago or whatever. He was like, "Can the boys predict the future?" That's what he said to me. So I'll need to get stuck into that particular season.
Yeah, it's alarming how close to reality it's gotten some things.
So, Craig, you actually preempted my next question about sort of best scenes. So I'll just go to Mary and ask her, what was your sort of favourite best scene in the movie?
Oh, I do. I'm going to cheat here and give a couple of answers. I do really like the reveal that John Hurt's character has been captured. I remember that being a big shock at the time, because we've seen him throughout the film sort of like frothing at the mouth, and he's just this giant face. Like he just seems, you know, omnipresent, omnipotent. Like he just seems like this incredible force. And then we see him and he's just a man. He's just a man with a bag over his head, and he's just done nothing. And I remember that feeling really shocking at the time, because it is this notion that you put people on pedestals, but actually they're just human. You know, it's why they say you shouldn't idolize celebrities, because they'll always let you down, sort of thing. But that always feels really shocking to me, especially because Hurt's physicality really changes in that scene. He's not this dominant force anymore. He just looks like an old man. So that in particular, I love. But I do really love the scene where obviously Evie places all the flowers, the red flowers on V, and just sort of sends him off. There's something really majestic about it, because it kind of invokes the sort of pomp and ceremony of like British royalty or even Parliament starting, because we've got silly ceremonies around that as well, but it's doing something that's so obviously the opposite of that. So I like that kind of visual illusion there.
Yeah. For myself, I really like the scene where he is in the botanist's bedroom. I just was kind of, it was completely different to what you were imagining was going to happen just a few moments before, because you thought he was going to like jump in there and use his knives on and everything, but it was very gentle. They had a discussion, and obviously she was like the head of the whole facility, so she was in charge of everything. So he had more to hate about her than anybody else, and almost in a way he had forgiven her because he gave her a gentle death. He didn't make sure that she suffered as much as the rest of them, but obviously he still killed her as well. And I thought that was a lovely wee, just sort of low-key scene that the film actually needed, because it was starting to ramp up, and it just gave a few wee minutes of calm there, and just thought, yep, that's kind of spot on. Really like that.
It's probably recognized that she was the only one who wasn't doing this for like personal gain. The fact that obviously everyone else, they used everything they did there to rise up in the ranks, whereas she abandoned that identity and just went. So it's very much, it's like I have not come for what you hope to do. I've come for what you did. So it's not judging her on anything that she's gained from that and anything that like she wanted from that. It's literally just you did an awful thing, and like unfortunately you do have to pay the price for that. Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's a beautiful scene.
Yep, good stuff. So closing up the pod, just a wee quick, I'm not going to even bother with a redundant question, because obviously that doesn't make sense. The redundant question is, would you recommend it? But do you feel that a film like this is essential viewing, and where do you think it sits in the whole sort of pantheon of dystopian movies that we have got ever since sort of post-millennium blues?
I think it's still quite high in that pantheon. I think that especially in a lot of reviews that I've seen of more recent dystopian films, one of the first comparisons they go for is comparing it to Viva Vendetta, purely because of just the construction of everything around just the individual people living in that society. Whether or not it's a good representation of how that society's been built, I don't think it necessarily matters. I think that people care about just like the circumstances they're currently in. And I think it is quite effective. I think the fact that it represents well the way in which people have been sort of led into that, and just led into that sense of conformity, and just breaking out of that conformity. You see enough of the horrors. You can elaborate on enough on the horrors of how this has come to be. It doesn't have to be flashy like some other ones. I mean, like Hunger Games has to rely on a significant amount of child brutal murder in order to be able to maintain its power base. Here we don't. We get a lot more focus on just sort of the media reports, and just seeing images of just people in hospital is just enough to generate that sense of fear. You don't have to go through this entire spectacle. So yeah, I think it stands out and holds up incredibly well with regards to that pantheon.
Yep, Mary?
Yeah, I would completely agree. I'm thinking of, I just recently rewatched Edgar Wright's The Running Man, which is obviously set in a dystopian future as well, but there's something distinctly more flashy about that. And although the threat feels real, it's not quite the level of threat that we have here, like people literally just disappearing, or lives being ruined, and government essentially doing as they please. So I think it definitely holds up in that sense, in that it shows how, as Craig said, how people can be sort of herded into this false sense of security, and how dangerous that is, and how dangerous like populist figures are as well, because that's certainly the way that politics is going in a lot of Western democracies, is that it's the populist figure that's leading the polls, etc., because they're willing to say the right things or come up with a catchy slogan. So I think it does a really good job of, by all means, showing spectacle, but by really distilling what it means to live in a society like this, where you are simply just a number to be spied on, used and abused by the government, and the people at the top are only out for themselves. And I think that V in particular is the character that we all hope we would be if we found ourselves living in a totalitarian hellscape. Obviously the chances of all of us being that brave, etc., are extremely small, but I think he gives you that sense of hope that maybe all it takes is just one person.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I like the idea as well, obviously, that you mentioned, Craig, that we're not relying on children killing other children at any point, like we get in the Maze Runner and the Hunger Games. So it makes a pleasant change, and they do tend to show more on screen rather than leaving it to the imagination of the viewers as well. They don't really trust the viewers. We talk an awful lot about, like especially sort of major studios having no interest in the intelligence of their viewers whatsoever. It's the bottom line for everybody. They don't think that people can do it, and it's getting even worse. Obviously, with the likes of Netflix, every 10 minutes you get somebody doing a wee bit of a recap because they think you've been scrolling or whatever. So yes, it's kind of all over the place. So yes, so there we have it. That is our review of V for Vendetta. I think you'll, if you've listened to us at all on this, then you realise that we are all pretty much in agreement with this as well. So, Craig, where can we find more of your stuff online?
So, primarily, I'm co-host of the Well Good Movies podcast, which is a podcast where every episode we take a film from anywhere within film's history, as chosen by the guests or that have been on previous episodes, and we effectively have a chain of movies every single year. Mary's been on several times. Mary has chosen several times some good films, also chosen some films that have traumatized me personally.
Yeah, no, I know genuinely, like, I owe Craig a massive apology because my first time on that podcast, I don't know if I won the quiz or maybe someone just defaulted to me, but I gifted him Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy, and I think that got us off on the wrong foot.
Nice.
People have agreed. What's the word I'm looking? People have made my situation worse than you have in that situation, but I obviously did watch that film and said, well, I can't use the word lovely anymore. But yeah, so I'm the co-host of that. My main job is just bringing some comedy, bullying my co-host that I believe you'll be meeting in a couple of episodes' time. Anything bad he says about me is a lie, and he deserves to be called out on it. The other thing I do is I also run the end game segment of that podcast, so very much just related to whatever film we'd be discussing. I'll come up with some form of game to put through this, and every now and then we also do a full like game show episode where we just have multiple guests and multiple of those games. Again, Mary has been on this as well.
Yeah, that was great fun. I have to say, Craig's skill at coming up with quiz ideas, like, and not just a straightforward quiz, but his skill at coming up with matching something to the film that it's not just like, oh, name these characters. Like not the last one I was on, but the previous one, we did the familial connections where you read out like on-screen siblings and we had to guess the film, and just stuff like that gets your brain working in different ways. I mean, I'm yet to win a quiz, but I really enjoy them.
I think you have won a quiz. I think it's just you very much focus on your failures, which you shouldn't do. But yeah, for anyone who's interested in learning more about that show and just generally listening to it, we are on all podcast avenues. So you name it, we're on there. I would say the most reliable place to probably find us is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. We do upload to that. I think maybe YouTube needs to be a little bit updated, so go for one of the other services. We are also on Instagram and Facebook, so we do post when our episodes come out there. I believe the most recent episodes that we have released but are yet to make posts about is Matilda from 1995, I believe.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I'll definitely be listening to that one. I was obsessed with that as a child. I wanted to be Matilda so badly, so I'm really looking forward to listening to that one.
Yeah.
How's that working out for you, Mary?
I don't have the magical powers quite yet.
I will say the chain of movies that's now happened since Matilda is intriguing. That's all I can say.
Yes, I imagine it would be, given where the film that I obviously chatted with you guys about, and then where that led to as well. So yes, the movie chain is a very, very good idea, because it's the whole Forrest Gump thing. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, as for ourselves, dear listener, by now you'll probably know where to get us. We're on all the usual social channels. Just search for Moviescramble. That's including Blue Sky, and I've recently been doing a wee bit of work on the YouTube channel as well, like punting some stuff up there as well. So that's hopefully getting a bit more traction for ourselves. If you like what you heard, you can also get in touch with us at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. Whether you are critiquing what we've actually produced here, or whether you actually want to get involved, maybe you run your own podcast, or you're involved in some sort of print journalism and you desperately want to speak about the film that ignited your love for cinema, then please do get in touch. We would be more than happy to arrange that. We have a few lined up still, but there is always space, let's face it. So it only remains for me to say cheerio. Bye.
Ta-ta.
Bye.